Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. We've all been there, big or small, doing something we're not supposed to do. Taking more than one piece of candy, staying out past curfew, deliberately disobeying that no trespassing sign. You get it. You've been warned not to do something, and you do it anyway. The consequence, like the action, can be big or small. Well, there's one that I hear about a lot. It's a bit fitting for our show. Ouija boards. The warnings are usually the same. Despite eventually being mass-produced by Hasbro, this is not a game. It's often played like one, though. And when you're dealing with the unknown, the paranormal, what are the consequences? Big or small? After hearing tonight's stories, I think it's safe to say they're anything but small. So, let's get started, shall we? We all have been told at one point or another not to mess with a Ouija board. It welcomes in spirits, it can bring on disaster, have respect, blah, blah, blah. So of course, when my brother and I were maybe 12 years old, we had to play with the one we found out our auntie had stashed away when we were visiting. We got about what you would expect from something we didn't take too seriously. Little girl wants to play, that whole thing. I think what creeped us out was when we said we were going to close the door now, that we had to go, and all we got was no. My brother and I just looked at each other. I told him to stop screwing with me, and he said the same thing back to me. So we said again, we really have to go. No. The board replied, well, we promised to come back tomorrow to play, if you let us go. We pleaded. Goodbye, it replied. Of course, we didn't come back. We packed that thing up and never looked at it again. Now, fast forward several years, my brother and I move out of our mom's place and we get our own apartment. Life is good. And my sister wasted no time moving into our old room in the basement, under the stairs. One day she called me up and asked, hey, you know a lot about that paranormal shit, don't you? Of course I did, or at least I knew more than she did. Well, she continued, there's this girl. She likes to run down the stairs. Bump, 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 bump. And then she slowly walks up the stairs. Thump, thump, thump. All night. On top of that, sometimes I'll hear someone just outside my door whispering, hey, until I go check to see who it is. Can you come check it out? Of course, because I didn't learn my lesson from the first time I played with spirit stuff, I said yes. So I go back to my mom's place one day, set up in the basement with a candle and my cell phone, like I'm a big shot paranormal investigator, and start asking questions. Are you here? What's your name? Are you angry at us? Nothing. So we try to escalate. Come on, coward, do something. Scratch us, yell at us. Hit something. Suddenly, from the living room downstairs, a knock. We looked at each other. Must be the cat, but let's go check. We go out and ask, can you do it again? And it obliged. Knock. This one surprised us. It sounded like it came from the wood-framed couch that we were standing beside. So we said, okay, one more time. If you're truly here, knock one more time. Now, I don't know if you had one of those metal banister railings going downstairs growing up, but if you had them, then you know the sound it makes when you hit it just right. That reverberating bong. Well, sure enough, after we called on it one last time, bong. Needless to say, we turned all the lights on, cleaned up, and went to bed for the night. It's been over a decade since then, and over the years it's escalated for her. No matter where she goes, bottles fly off the counters, bumps in the night, shadows in the corner, torn up bed sheets, and nightmares of that same little girl, only now she's angry. It seems to follow her wherever she goes, and when I'm with her, it's pretty common to hear a bump in another room, or something firmly in the middle of the coffee table to suddenly be on the floor. She just kind of lives with it, but I can't help but wonder, did my brother and I accidentally call on something all those years ago? And did it decide to torment our sister when we broke our promise to come back? When I was little, my parents would often send me to Finland to spend the summer with my grandparents. We lived in Estonia. When I was 9, they decided to send me to Russia instead, so I'd spend it with my great aunt, whom I rarely spent time with. My great aunt had an old log cottage-style house and a sauna on her property. One time, my great aunt and grandmother told me that we would all be going to the sauna, but made me promise not to speak after we left it. I did. We went into the sauna, and my great aunt sat me down on a bench. She kneeled down in front of my face and said some weird words, after which I fell into a trance-like state. I was still awake, but everything around me was like a dream. I was fully present, but I couldn't move my body or head. My grandmother lay down on one of the top benches. My great aunt started cracking chicken eggs and putting other stuff on my grandmother's body. I tried to move my body, but I couldn't. However, I managed to turn my head a little to the right. I noticed a massive mirror standing against the wall on the floor. So as I'm looking at it, that mirror lifted off the ground and started floating in small circles in a clockwise direction. I did not dream of it happening. It happened. I remember it so clearly. I wanted to scream in terror in that moment, but I couldn't. My mouth was shut and couldn't move. Once my great aunt and grandmother were done doing whatever they were doing, we showered, got dressed, and left the sauna. As I walked out of the sauna, I felt that weird hold on my body be broken, so I could finally talk. And I blurted out something like, "That was really nice." And they got so angry at me. Only years later did I find out that they were actually doing a youth spell, and to talk after doing something like that was to null it or make it void. That's why they were angry. 15 years after the incident, while I was visiting my grandmother in Finland, I asked her about that day, and also if she was into witchcraft. She pretended like she didn't know what I was talking about, and denied it. My mom claims that my grandma is a witch. For some background, I've been a behavioral health nurse for about 12 years. My first job was at a freestanding mental health facility in the South. This facility is pretty uniquely constructed, as it was originally a plantation owned by a wealthy Irishman who immigrated here sometime in the 1700s. The original plantation house is still there and is now used as a business office, and the hospital itself was constructed to be attached to the house. If you explore the campus, there's a small graveyard with the original owner's tombstone, as well as some other family members of his. Additionally, There's a sign that says something along the lines of, "This is dedicated to the slaves that worked and died on this plantation." Anyway, one of the stories that's been passed down among the employees there for decades is that a young girl in the Irishman's family, one of his daughters or grandchildren, passed away on the plantation at a really young age, and that her ghost still lingers around the house and the facility, and that there are certain patient rooms that have unusual amounts of paranormal activity. One day I was walking past one of these rooms, and in my peripheral I saw a young girl who looked to be about 9 or 10 years old, sitting on the bed. She was wearing a colonial-looking dress, appropriate for the time period in which she was alive, and she looked directly in my eyes when I turned to look at her. I was incredibly startled, and my mind raced for a few seconds, trying to convince myself that she wasn't there. I walked a few feet past the room, gathered the courage to go back, and she had disappeared from sight. She didn't have any ethereal qualities, nothing otherworldly or strange. She literally just looked like a real person, sitting right there in plain view. During my time there, I never heard of anyone else that saw her as clearly as I did. But every once in a while, one of my coworkers or a patient would experience something strange, like doors opening and slamming shut. I remember one patient in particular that ran out of his room, white as a sheet. He said that while he was laying in bed, his bathroom door slammed on its own. It was so loud, I heard it from the nurse's station myself. This patient was there for addiction and had no history of hallucinations. This just happened to me today. I needed a watch for work, and I looked at the usual spot where I keep it. Nothing. Then I went searching the area, and I couldn't find it. On my way out, I grabbed a jacket I haven't worn since last year. On a whim, I searched the pockets, turning them inside out, and nothing. About an hour ago, I heard a beep. I decided to check my pocket. I found my watch. No idea how it got there. It doesn't have a hole in it could have fallen in. Years ago, I lost a buck in the car. After searching, I couldn't find my buck, but I found a 20 instead. I never lost a 20. Never found that buck. Like most people, I had a rather unfavorable experience while playing with a Ouija board. I was 16 years old, my sister was 15, and her friend also 15. We thought we were witches, basically. I'm not knocking witches, but we just weren't them. We lit our candles, we turned out all the lights, and we set this up in our bonus room. My parents usually went to bed pretty early. As soon as they did, we started the session. No one spoke at first, and we hadn't really discussed exactly what we were going to ask, but eventually my sister asks, "If someone is here with us, can you tell us your name?" We waited. Nothing. 10 minutes goes by and our patience is dwindling. My sister asks again, "Can you tell us your name?" A few moments later, we all feel the planchette move, ever so slightly and slowly, towards no. I instantly knew that no one was messing with me because they each looked more afraid than I did. So I ask, "Do you want to talk to us?" It moves slightly away from the no, and then quickly back to it. And then, like something straight out of a horror movie, the planchette repeats this motion over and over, quickly, as if screaming no at us. We all let go simultaneously and stand upright. My sister's friend looks like she's about to pass out. We're standing over the board, essentially staring at it, like we knew something more was going to happen. We watched as the planchette lifted off the board, hovering about 4 inches above it. Instinctually, we all grabbed hands, and we waited for this thing to drop. Meanwhile, you can hear our dog going crazy from the other side of the door, barking nastily and scratching at the door. He was relentless. I knew my parents would wake up any minute. The planchette was still hovering over the board, sitting perfectly still in the air. We all let out a yelp when my parents came bursting into the bonus room. I never took my eyes off the board, though, and I watched as the planchette fell suddenly. My sister let go of my hand and ran out of the room, her friend following close behind, leaving me to explain to my parents what we were doing. Before going back to bed, my mom grabs my sister and her friend from her room, telling them that they need to be with me when I say goodbye, that we have to say goodbye to the board, and to promise not to use that thing in the house anymore. So, scared shitless, we returned to the board and said our goodbyes. The board didn't say it back, but we felt our job was done. That bonus room must have absorbed some sort of bad juju. Our dog never stepped foot in there again without making a huge fuss, and he wasn't a fussy boy. When my parents were getting ready to sell the house, there were lots of accidents that took place in that room. An electrical fire, paint splatter, and the door refusing to open unless you were literally about to break it down. My intuition tells me that it's more than just a coincidence. My mom's house was haunted by her mother-in-law for over 10 years. In 2000, my mom remarried and moved in with my stepfather, Joe. Her mother-in-law died in the house at the age of 97 after years of home health care due to advanced dementia. The following isn't necessarily a ghost story, but a series of paranormal incidents that took place over a period of 12 years or so, as narrated to me by my mom. The start of it all. Around December 29th, 2002, right after Joe's mom died, we were on the computer downstairs, trying to think of a place that we could go to get away for a few days. It had been a very sad Christmas for Joe, with his mom in a coma in the upstairs bedroom. As we were sitting at the computer, we had a view into the next room, where there was a stuffed chair and some papers piled on top of it. On the very top of the chair, there was a small piece of paper or tissue. To our astonishment, all of a sudden, it lifted itself up into the air, no air vents nearby, floated around for a little bit as if it had been caught in a breeze, and then fell to the floor. I got up to look for it, as this was highly unusual, but I could not find it. We both looked everywhere for that silly piece of paper, but it had totally disappeared. One of the first incidents was when I discovered a set of keys on the steps going upstairs. Joe kept his jewelry and keys that unlocked some cabinets upstairs on a dresser in a jewelry box in the basement. It made for a good hiding place. One day, I was going up the steps when I discovered that set of keys on about the 6th step. Neither Joe nor myself had been anywhere near the jewelry box for a long time, so it was inexplicable. I was using the downstairs bathroom, which had an artificial hanging plant in the corner. There's no air vents in the bathroom, only the underside of the beams that support the foundation, so the ceiling is open. Out of the corner of my eye, I see this plant suddenly start wildly spinning round and round, as if an invisible hand were twirling it fast. It kept that up for about a minute, and then it just stopped. Didn't slow down, just stopped on its own. During this time, radios would be turned on at random. I'd be in another part of the house and hear one. At first, I thought one of us hadn't totally turned off the radio when finished, but after a while, it appeared fairly obvious that there was something else in the house turning them on. Since getting rid of our entity, we haven't had that occur one time. On July 6, 2010, around 10 a.m., I was in the TV room catching up on some sewing, and Joe was gone. The TV was off. At the time, we had a TV that had big floor speakers on either side of it. I was on a love seat and at an angle from the TV, when suddenly I heard a male's voice, kind of tenor, coming through the speaker closest to me that said,
"That wasn't per my instructions."
Many times I'd be downstairs, preparing my classes or on the computer. These incidents always happened when Joe wasn't there. I'd hear what sounded like him practicing his golf chip shot in the TV room. The sound of his club hitting a plastic golf ball was a distinctive one, easily identified. I would call upstairs to him, thinking he was back, but he never was. I'd go up and check, and he never was. One time, I heard the sound of a little girl laughing at the very top of the steps. Joe had had an older sister that he never knew, Sandra, who died at the age of 3.5 from pneumonia, but in another house. I'd often hear the sound of the garage door into the TV room opening, signaling to me that Joe had returned. When I'd go upstairs to check, he was still gone, and the garage door was closed. I would hear the sound of footsteps upstairs, coming from various areas on the upstairs level. Of course, I always thought that it was Joe back home, but his car was always gone. I also heard things that were dropped on the floor upstairs while I was downstairs. I could never tell exactly where the sound was coming from, but sometimes it'd be really loud, so I'd go upstairs to investigate. However, nothing had ever fallen, nor was anything out of place. I often heard voices upstairs. I could swear that I could hear Joe's voice calling my name, or I might hear people talking together. Sometimes it was another solo voice, but always slightly muffled. Of course, anyone else except Joe entering the house would have been scary. I sleep with a mouth guard every night for my TMJ. Sometimes, when I woke up in the morning, it wasn't in my mouth, having been removed by, I think, some entity during the night while I slept. I'd find it in odd places in or on the bed, on the floor, or an odd place on top of the nightstand. It didn't make sense, and now that there's no more hauntings, it's always intact in my mouth when I wake up. But for a long while, I wasn't sure where I'd find it in the morning. I wish I could be more specific, but I just remember that little things in the house would suddenly disappear, never to be found. For example, we might leave a pen overnight on the dining room table, only to find it gone the next day. The worst thing for me was quite often hearing what sounded like a radio being played somewhere in the house, or somewhere out there, with people talking. It was always a group of people talking, and their speech was always garbled. Sometimes it sounded like they were vaguely laughing, but try as I might, I never could hear anyone speaking clearly, so I couldn't tell what they were saying. I'd hear this downstairs and upstairs. Joe heard it too. One time, he was at the dining room table, and he heard the same thing. Oddly enough, I didn't hear it this time, just him. I often had the disconcerting feeling that I was being watched in the house. I never saw something out of the corner of my eye, nor did I see anything one might describe as a ghost. I just felt like something was in the house with me, watching me. The next grouping of incidents my mom narrated to me have to do with others' experiences in the house. Somewhere around 2008, Joe and I took a vacation. At the time, your brother lived in his house close by, so we asked if he would come get our mail every couple of days and put it on our dining room table. After about the second or third time, he was over here one day, using the upstairs bathroom. When he came out and heard a rather loud conversation going on in the kitchen, he paused, trying to make out what they were saying. But, like with us, it was garbled, and they would laugh. It freaked him out so much he decided to pick up the rest of the mail and take it back to his house. Your brother spent the night here sometimes, and would experience the guest bedroom door, perfectly shut, open up by itself. He, as well, witnessed the door to the TV room to the garage open up by itself while he'd be watching TV. Your grandmother was visiting here around 2013, after your grandfather had died. Sometime during the night, around 1 a.m., she had to use the bathroom. On her way, she smelled something cooking in the kitchen, like a roast cooking in a crock pot. Of course, she investigated, and of course, there was nothing there. We hadn't even used the crock pot that evening. She said it was a nice smell, but definitely meat cooking, and rather strong. When you and your ex-wife visited and spent the night downstairs, she told me the next day when she got up at night to use the bathroom, she saw a ghostly form of an old woman in her path. And when you and your ex-wife were seated in the TV room on the love seat, all of a sudden the light on the table next to the love seat came on by itself. I don't know if it was the same visit, but you were visiting, and there was some sort of list that you had compiled. We were going back and forth putting things in your car, and you almost forgot your list. I don't recall if we put the list on top of the telephone table in the dining room, or if it was on the table in the guest bedroom. At any rate, when I came back inside to fetch it, it was gone. Totally gone. You came in and I remember us looking everywhere, but we never found it. When you were staying over once, I'd given you a framed picture of your nephew. I put it on the nightstand so you wouldn't forget it when you left. It inexplicably disappeared, and we later found it at the bottom of a drawer in the same room. The last incident I can recall is the handheld mirror swinging back and forth on its own in the downstairs bathroom. That was pretty amazing. That's the end of her narration to me. After 2014, the hauntings suddenly stopped. To be clear, everyone who stayed at my mom's house experienced something unexplainable. Whenever I visited the house from out of town, I would experience doors opening by themselves, electronics turning on, muffled voices. Whatever entity or entities caused these incidents has moved on, but left an impression on my family that we'll never forget. So my friend and I like to drive around at night, talk, get food, listen to music, etc. We're always driving down back roads, mostly in my small town. We usually play tricks on the town perv whenever we see him driving out and about at night too. Tonight, we didn't see him and we decided to go drive around and circle back to the middle of town to see if he came out tonight or not. My friend decided to go down this one back road. It wasn't a road we'd never driven on, considering we'd been down every road in that small town, but it wasn't the normal back road we usually take. I didn't question why she went down this road instead of the other one. I just continued our conversation. As she's driving and I'm talking, we both stop mid-sentence to ask, Did you just see that? As a yellow, large, dust-looking glob moves across the street into the trees. Not even into the trees. It was more like overlapping them, if that makes sense. I'm glad she saw it too, because I would have thought I was crazy, as it wouldn't have been the first time I'd seen something and no one else had. It was transparent, dirty yellow, kind of like what your yellow marker looks like once you used it over black or brown pen while coloring. And it looked like a gust of wind blew over a dry pile of dirt. It's 64 degrees out and no wind, and it wasn't from our car, as it was visible in front of us, and then next to our car. My friend and I both think that it might have been a ghost or spirit of some kind, but the fact that it was yellow scares us, because doing further research online, yellow spirits usually mean they're sending a cautious warning. But I just wanted to confirm that. What does a yellow spirit or ghost, dust particles, mean for us? Are we going to be okay? This is the second time this has happened to me. Last year in October, I had a problem with things breaking. For example, my some-month-old phone suddenly had a crack on the screen when I retrieved it after work. It was in an area I constantly had my eye on, so it didn't drop and nothing was dropped on it. I also woke up to find the rim of my glasses broken. When I went to sleep, they weren't damaged at all, and nothing fell on them. I mentioned it to a coworker, and she suggested that I salt the place. I did, and after I was done, I heard a knock on the wall. I brought my tortoise to the wall, and he gave me a funny look. I heard animals are more sensitive. On my coworker's advice, I'd also bought gargoyles. They're facing the door. A few hours ago, I heard a strange sound that sounded like some sort of cat being murdered. The sound came from the front. Just heard it once and it was short. Thought my dog might be safe going out the back. I took my eye off my dog for a bit and I grabbed the salt. I saw her doing her business and I started salting along the doors to give her privacy. After I let her in, she was acting a little bit weird. While I was with her, I heard a couple of odd sounds coming from the front. She did too, but she didn't want to bark at them or anything. She's a Pomeranian. There wasn't anything out there when I checked. Could this be the same thing from October? Or what could this be? When I was growing up, my parents would occasionally tell me the story of the time they played with the Ouija board. It was when they were dating, before I was born, and they had a crazy night with it, where it answered all kinds of questions. There's one thing that my parents are not: liars. So, these stories only intrigued me to find out for myself. When I was 17, I was a senior in high school, and I had my first serious boyfriend. We were both very curious to know if the Ouija board truly worked, so we bought one. My bedroom was in the basement, and we set it up on my bed. It was close to midnight. We lit candles, turned the lights out, and sat cross-legged on the bed, on each side of the board. We were supposed to pick a question and focus on it, with our index fingers lightly touching the planchette. The question we decided to ask was, will anyone talk to us? We must have sat there focusing on that question for about 40 minutes. occasionally shaking our hands out from them being tired of being held in that position. After about 40 minutes, the planchette started to vibrate underneath our fingers. Then it slowly moved to the word, yes. We stopped for a moment and looked at each other like, is this real? Then we asked, are you a spirit? And it moved away from the word yes and back to it. At this point, I noticed that I could feel a strange electricity moving throughout my body. I didn't like it. I've never felt it before or since. We decided to ask it, are you nice? And it very quickly moved to the word no. Now I'm riddled with terror. I exclaim that I cannot play anymore, and I go to pick up the board and put it back in the box. Except the board will not move, not a sliver. It felt as though it was stuck with cement. I remember yanking with my entire body at least 3 times, before suddenly it felt as if something got off of the board, and I flew backwards with it in my hands. I slammed it into the box and closed it. My boyfriend's face was pale. He tells me, I have to go home. And I'm like, oh my God, don't leave me here. But he leaves. Here's where it gets even more scary. After I walked my boyfriend to the door, I went back down to my room. Only it didn't look like my room anymore. Don't get me wrong, nothing changed visually. It was still all of my stuff, but I felt like I was in a parallel universe. I felt so far away from all that was comfort and good. I don't know how else to describe it. I'm not a religious person at all, but I was so beside myself with terror that I didn't know what to do except to grab the Bible. I slept with it in my arms with the lights on. I actually slept with the lights on for the next week. I did not tell my parents what I had done because I didn't want to get in trouble for playing with the Ouija board in the house, or for my boyfriend staying over way later than he was allowed to. We played it after everyone went to bed. My room continued to not look or feel like mine for a couple of weeks. Also, when I would get up for school in the morning, I would have to walk through a dark basement living room to get to the stairs because there was no light switch by my bedroom door for the living room. And my bedroom door was in the back corner of it. So when I would first open my bedroom door, the light in my room would cast out into the living room darkness, and for a split second, I would see a black cat run from the patch of light into the dark. I would shake it off as my eyes playing tricks on me, but after a couple of weeks, I was eating breakfast upstairs with my family, and my 7-year-old sister exclaimed out loud, "I keep seeing a black cat in the basement." That confirmed that it was not a trick of my eyes. Also, about a month after playing the Ouija board, my dad says to me, "I don't know why, but the basement and the stairs have really bad vibes. And it's bothering me because when I bought this house, one of the things I liked was that it had good energy." That's when I realized for sure, without a doubt, that all of the stuff was not in my head. I had haunted my parents' house by playing that game. I learned after the fact that I was supposed to say goodbye before stopping the game. I think that had something to do with it. Another strange thing that happened, I always slept with my bedroom door locked. A few weeks after playing the game, I woke up in the middle of the night to somebody jiggling my bedroom door handle violently. In the morning, I asked who was messing with me, but everyone acted like I was weird for asking. About 6 months after playing it, my stepmom was cleaning the house, found the Ouija board, and threw it away. Things started to calm down a little bit after that, but it took years for that basement to feel okay again. And honestly, it never went back to feeling the way it did before I played. I finally owned up to my dad and stepmom about what I had done. I wasn't in huge trouble, but my dad was like, "I knew the house felt different, damn it." And to this day, I feel bad for bringing that energy into the home. After that experience, I want absolutely nothing to do with Ouija boards, and they're not allowed in my home. I've learned. Well, friends, it appears tonight's episode has come to a close. But I want to thank you for being here and for listening. And I want to thank everyone who shared their stories. I appreciate all of you. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to The Darkest Hour. Also, tap the bell so you never miss a thing. Keep up with me and all things Darkest Hour by following me on Instagram in the Darkest Hour subreddit at The Darkest Hour YT. If you want to support the channel in other ways, consider becoming a patron. You'll see your name at the end of each video, like these amazing folks, early access to episodes, and much more. I've put a link in the description, so check it out. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, Amanda, darkesthour@gmail.com. Stay spooky.